running Huberman through the heuristic. So today we're doing something a little different. We're going to take the Huberman protocols, the whole system, not any single claim, and run them through the framework evaluation heuristic. All 14 properties, terminal node analysis, the fusion diagnostic, the full treatment. And I want to be clear up front, this isn't a takedown. Individual claims Huberman makes about neuroscience are often grounded in real studies. Morning sunlight exposure and circadian rhythm regulation, that's solid science. Cold exposure increasing norepinephrine, real finding. The question isn't whether the individual bricks are real. The question is, what kind of building did the bricks get assembled into, and what does that building do to the people living in it? Let's start at the top. What does it claim to model? Property 1 asks, what's the domain claim? And on the surface, this is the strongest possible type. Observable biological systems. Neurons, hormones, circadian clocks, the autonomic nervous system. These are agents doing measurable things. You can make predictions about them. You can test those predictions. That's as good as it gets for domain claims. But here's where it starts to get interesting. The stated domain is neuroscience. The actual domain as practiced is life optimization, and those are very different things. There's a silent annexation happening where motivation, productivity, relationships, even meaning get pulled under the umbrella of it's all neurobiology. The move from here's how cortisol works to here's how you should structure your morning is a jump from an observable system to a prescriptive life framework. And the neuroscience vocabulary makes that jump invisible. You're still hearing study citations, so it still feels like hard science. But the prescriptive output has left the observable domain. You're no longer in the territory where the framework earned its credibility. Can it be wrong? Property 2, falsifiability, and this is mixed in an instructive way. The individual claims are falsifiable. Morning sunlight shifts your cortisol peak. You can test that, and people have. Cold exposure increases norepinephrine, testable, tested. This is real. But the protocols as a system, barely falsifiable at all. If the stack doesn't work for you, the diagnosis is always, you're not doing it right. You need to add another protocol. Your sleep is off. Your gut microbiome is interfering. The system as a whole metabolizes failure as incomplete implementation. This is a specific and actually quite common failure mode. I'd call it component falsifiability masquerading as system falsifiability. Each individual brick passes the test. The cathedral does not, and most people are buying the cathedral, not the bricks. Property 3 follows directly from this. How does the framework handle counterexamples? And the answer is, it reroutes heavily. When a study contradicts a protocol, the move is the literature is nuanced, or that study had methodological issues. When someone reports that they did the cold plunge for 6 months and felt nothing, the reroute goes through dosage, timing, stacking, individual variation. The framework has no defined breaking condition. There's no state of affairs that would cause the community to say, this protocol is wrong, stop doing it. Compare that to something that breaks cleanly. If Goodhart's law predicted a proxy would be gamed and it wasn't, the framework takes a visible hit. Huberman protocols don't have an equivalent. They reroute through the massive parameter space of implementation details, and implementation details are infinite, so the rerouting never runs out of road. The vocabulary game. Now we get into the vocabulary mechanics, and this is where it gets really revealing. Property 4 asks you to translate the framework's terms into plain language and see what survives. Where translation is impossible without losing a real distinction, the vocabulary is earning its keep. Where translation goes through perfectly, the vocabulary is ornamental, it's decoration. So let's test some terms. Anterior mid-cingulate cortex, that's earned. It names a specific brain structure with specific documented functions. You genuinely can't compress that to plain language without losing information. Fine. Dopamine baseline, partially earned. The concept of tonic versus phasic dopamine is real neuroscience. But as it functions in the protocols, it's doing less precise work than it appears. It's operating as a metaphor for how motivated you feel, dressed in neuroscience clothing. Non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR, and this is a great example. This is yoga nidra. This is progressive relaxation. These practices have existed for centuries. The rebranding does zero structural work. What it does do is strip the cultural and spiritual context and replace it with a sciencey-sounding term that signals this is neuroscience, not woo. The term is marketing, not compression. Deliberate cold exposure. It's cold plunges. The word deliberate is doing pure valence work. It sounds precise, clinical, protocolish. It adds no structural distinction whatsoever. If I had to estimate the ratio, I'd say maybe 30% genuine structural residue, 70% ornamental relabeling of existing practices in neuroscience vocabulary. Walking outside, taking cold showers, meditating, taking supplements, sleeping in a dark room. The vocabulary creates a feeling of precision that far exceeds the actual precision of the underlying claims. And this feeds directly into Property 5, valence injection. This is where you compare a framework's terms to their plain language synonyms and measure the emotional delta. The gap between those two is the valence the framework is injecting into your decision-making through vocabulary alone. Protocol versus habit or routine. Significant delta. You don't skip a protocol, you follow protocols. A routine is negotiable. A protocol is prescribed. The valence injection says, compliance is scientific, deviation is negligence. Optimize versus improve. Delta. Optimize implies there's a correct configuration you're converging toward. Improve is open-ended. Optimization injects an engineering frame that makes suboptimality feel like a system error rather than a human choice. Tools versus tips or suggestions. Delta. Tools implies instrumentality, precision, defined function. A tip you can ignore. A tool, well, you're just failing to use it, aren't you? And non-sleep deep rest versus relaxation. The delta here is performing a very specific valence operation. It's stripping the contemplative connotation and replacing it with a productivity frame. Yoga nidra is a practice of being. NSDR is a performance tool. The aggregate picture is heavy valence injection, almost entirely in the direction of turning life into an engineering problem. The vocabulary systematically recodes human activities, sleeping, walking, breathing, being cold, resting as optimization targets. And the soma hears, you are a system to be tuned. Deviation from the protocol is suboptimal performance. And here's the crucial part. This is invisible valence injection, the dangerous kind. It doesn't feel like a value claim, it feels like science. That's what makes it so effective and so worth examining. How does it click? Property 6 asks about click mechanics. What type of insight experience does the framework produce when you first adopt it? And the primary type here is a construction click. Before Huberman, you walked outside in the morning. After Huberman, you're getting early morning sunlight exposure to set your circadian rhythm and trigger a cortisol peak. Same behavior, brand new perceptual grid. Now everything gets parsed through the optimization lens. You start noticing your dopamine baseline, your autonomic balance, your sleep architecture. This is the construction click phenomenon. The vocabulary is generating pattern matches, not compressing pre-existing observations. And the critical thing about construction clicks is they're not self-correcting. Once you have the term, confirmation bias does the rest. You see dopamine depletion because you're looking for dopamine depletion. The click feels like discovery, but it might be projection. The territory didn't change. Your parsing grid did. There's also a strong secondary click of the relief type. For people struggling with energy, focus, sleep, motivation, the protocols offer it's not your fault, your neurochemistry is miscalibrated, here's the fix. That's structurally identical to you're not broken, you have ADHD. The relief is real. But the mechanism is pain reduction, not accuracy validation. And there's a tertiary aesthetic click. The system is beautiful in its systematicity. Every domain of life mapped to neurotransmitters, every problem mapped to a protocol. The elegance generates intellectual pleasure independent of whether the protocols actually work as advertised. One more thing about click mechanics. The entry cost for the content is low, free podcast, YouTube, but the implementation cost is high. Elaborate morning routines, supplement stacks, cold plunge setups, specific timing of caffeine, light exposure schedules. The sunk cost of having reorganized your entire daily life around the protocols amplifies whatever click type originally fired. And this means the click was partially guaranteed by the investment, not earned by the content. The social life of the framework. Property 7 asks about community composition. Are the speakers practitioners who encountered the problem the framework models, or commentators who adopted it for social legibility? And this one tilts heavily toward commentators. The actual practitioners, neuroscientists using this research in clinical or lab settings, are a small minority. Some have publicly distanced themselves from the protocolization of their findings. The community is overwhelmingly people who adopted the framework for self-optimization and social signaling. It's substantially a lifestyle community wearing a lab coat. The social capital comes from performing the protocols, sharing your stack, discussing your morning routine. Property 8, replication mechanism, shows a blend of insight reward and identity recruitment in almost equal measure. The insight reward is the satisfaction of learning why your cold plunge works neurochemically. Sharing that insight is socially rewarding. You sound informed, scientific, health conscious. The identity recruitment is the lifestyle. You don't just learn about circadian biology. You become someone who does morning sunlight, cold plunge, delayed caffeine, NSDR. The behavioral stack is the identity. There's also a mild but real crisis capture element. People who are burnt out, depressed, anxious, struggling with focus. The protocols position themselves as the answer at a point of vulnerability. Your dopamine is depleted is a very effective crisis capture frame. Property 9, compatibility. It claims high compatibility. I'm just giving you tools based on science. Use what works. In practice, once you fully adopted the stack, it's medium to low compatibility. The protocol stack is demanding enough that it functionally becomes an operating system for your daily life. Try running Huberman protocols alongside a contemplative practice that says, stop optimizing and just sit with what is. The implicit terminal nodes conflict directly. Huberman says, optimize the machine. Contemplative practice says, stop being a machine. And the subtle annexation move is absolutely present. Meditation is great. Here's the neuroscience of why it works and the optimal protocol for it. That's not compatibility. That's parsing a contemplative practice through an optimization grammar. It's annexation wearing a smile. The Goodhart question. Property 10 is Goodhart depth, and this is where it gets sharp. 3 questions. What does the framework say it's for? Health, well-being, optimal function, science-based tools for everyday life. What gets rewarded in the community? Elaborate morning routines, supplement stacks, cold plunge documentation, complexity of protocol, performing optimization. And how far apart are those two answers? Large. The stated goal is health. The actual optimization target in the community is legible performance of a health-optimized identity. And here's the fastest test from the heuristic. Do success stories leave? Someone who genuinely achieved optimal health, great sleep, stable energy, robust focus, would logically need the community less. They'd just be living their life, but the community retains and rewards escalation. More protocols, more supplements, more granularity. The optimization is the point, not the optimized state. And if you know Kaczynski's framework, this pattern is immediately recognizable. This is a surrogate activity with unusual clarity. The process has displaced the goal. The power process is being satisfied by the optimization activity itself, not by the health outcome. And the framework's vocabulary makes this displacement invisible because every escalation looks like taking your health more seriously. Goodhart depth deep. How deep does it go? Properties 11 and 12 look at identity bonding and exit cost. The identity bonding is medium strong and accelerating. Early adopters say, I use some Huberman tips. Deeper adopters say, I follow Huberman protocols. And notice the verb shift there. Follow, not use. Deepest adopters have reorganized their daily lives around the stack and react to criticism of Huberman with personal defensiveness. Criticism of the protocols feels like criticism of the person's intelligence, lifestyle choices, and health investment. The personal scandal that emerged in early 2024 was actually a useful natural experiment here. Fused users defended him with classic framework protection mechanisms. Performance users updated. The split in the community's response was almost a clean readout of identity bonding depth across the population. Exit cost is medium-high, but through a specific and interesting mechanism. It's not primarily social, you won't lose your friends. It's behavioral embedding. You've reorganized your entire daily routine around the protocols. Morning sunlight timing, caffeine delay, cold plunge infrastructure, supplement subscriptions, sleep environment modifications. Leaving the framework means dismantling a physical life structure, not just updating a belief. And then the question hits you. What do I do in the morning now? The protocols filled the slot where an unstructured life used to be. What decisions does it annihilate? Properties 13 and 14 are about what happens when you try to act through the framework. Protocol generation, property 13, is maximal. This is the framework's core strength and its core danger. It generates specific, actionable, timed, dosed instructions. For people who were paralyzed by optionality around health behaviors, this is genuinely valuable. The framework tells you exactly what to do. The danger is that protocol generation without adequate epistemic grounding means you're getting very precise instructions built on moderately reliable science, extrapolated well beyond its demonstrated domain. The precision of the protocol is not the precision of the underlying evidence. But the protocol format injects false confidence about the evidence base. Property 14 is the decision surface. What decisions the framework makes possible, what decisions it paralyses, and most importantly, what decisions it annihilates, makes unthinkable. The decidable zone is large. Is my morning routine optimized? Am I getting enough sunlight? Should I take this supplement? The framework makes an enormous number of daily micro-decisions decidable. But the invisible zone, zone 3, what the framework makes unthinkable, is where the real story lives. Should I stop optimizing? This decision literally cannot surface within the grammar. The vocabulary has no term for enough. Every state is either optimized or suboptimal. The concept of not needing a protocol doesn't exist. Is the optimization itself causing my suffering? Invisible. The framework cannot model itself as a stressor. If you're stressed about your supplement timing, the framework diagnoses a cortisol problem, not a framework problem. What if my body's signals are more trustworthy than the protocol? Invisible. The framework's implicit hierarchy is, published literature is above your subjective experience. Your felt sense is noise to be overridden by protocol. What would I do with my morning if I wasn't optimizing it? Invisible. The slot is filled. The question of what unstructured, unoptimized existence even feels like has been annihilated. The pattern across all of these, the framework systematically annihilates decisions about whether to optimize, leaving only decisions about how to optimize. The vocabulary acts as a one-way valve. You can always add a protocol. You can never question protocolization itself. The terminal node. Now let's run the terminal node analysis. You chase the Y chain down to where it bottoms out. Why cold plunge? Increases norepinephrine, builds resilience. Why increase norepinephrine? Improves focus, mood, energy. Why improve focus, mood, energy? Perform better, feel better. Why perform better? And here the chain terminates at something like, the biological machine should be running at optimal parameters. This is a compound terminal, and compound terminals predict schisms. The terminal is actually rational optimization fused with of the individual biological self, and these can diverge. What if rational optimization honestly applied tells you, stop optimizing? The marginal returns are negative and the opportunity cost is your actual life. The rational component says stop. The optimization of biological self component says keep going. That's the fault line. And the predicted schism is already visible in the community. It's the split between people who use the science to make targeted interventions and then move on with their lives, versus people for whom the optimization practice itself has become the meaning. The first group holds a modular tool. The second group is living inside a comprehensive framework fused to their identity. Same vocabulary, same podcast, completely different relationship to the thing. The fusion diagnostic. Finally, let's run the fusion performance diagnostic on the typical deep Huberman adopter. Variable 1, relief click actuality. Often yes. Anomie, burnout, loss of control, optimize your biology provides both relief and a sense of agency. That's a real wound being soothed. Fusion force. Variable 2, somatic dissonance. Low to medium initially. The protocols often do produce some felt improvement, especially around sleep and energy. Your body isn't contradicting the framework, at least not at first. Fusion force. Variable 3, grammar monopoly. Partial. Most adopters have other frameworks for other domains. But for the health and daily routine domain specifically, Huberman often holds monopoly. Domain-specific fusion force. Variable 4, installation depth. Post-consolidation for adults, but it finds a gap. Most people have an I should be doing more about my health anxiety slot, and the protocols drop right into it. Gap-filling fusion. Variable 5, the reward ratio. And this is where the trajectory gets interesting. It starts somatic. I actually feel better, I'm sleeping better, I have more energy. But it drifts social, posting routines, discussing stacks, the identity performance. That's a fusion to performance trajectory. Variable 6, wound origin. And this is the critical one, it's hybrid. The pre-existing wound is real anomie, burnout, a feeling of not being in control of your own body and life. But the framework generates new anxiety. Am I optimized enough? Did I get my sunlight at the right time? Is my supplement stack complete? The optimization anxiety is an iatrogenic wound. The framework is creating the very unease it positions itself as solving. Variable 7, meaning load. Low to medium for most adopters. But for people who have restructured their entire daily life, career, and identity around optimization, it's climbing. The predicted trajectory for the typical deep adopter starts as genuine partial fusion because the protocols do something and the relief click is real. Then enters a hollowing trajectory as the optimization anxiety accumulates. The social reward gradually displaces the somatic reward, and the surrogate activity pattern becomes harder to ignore. The minority with high meaning load, people who have reorganized everything around this, may end up in locked-in performance. They can see the diminishing returns. They might even privately know the framework has become its own problem, but they can't exit because the sunk cost and identity investment are too high. That's the quiet trap. The verdict. So what are we looking at? Huberman protocols are a high-protocol generation, low epistemic grounding, heavy valence injection framework that rebrands existing practices, walks, cold water, meditation, sleep hygiene, supplements, in neuroscience vocabulary. The rebranding produces a construction click that feels like a compression click. It feels like you're finally understanding things you already knew, but you're actually installing a new perceptual grid. The core move, the thing the framework is really doing beneath all the vocabulary, is translating the human body from something you inhabit into something you operate. And the vocabulary does this silently, and the valence injection makes the engineering stance feel like the only rational option. Who wouldn't want to be scientific about their health? The genuine value is real. The protocol generation is real. For people who needed structure around health behaviors, the framework provides it. Some of the individual claims are well supported. The genuine danger is also real. The Zone 3 blind spots are enormous. The framework cannot model itself as a problem. The surrogate activity pattern is textbook. The process of optimization has displaced the goal of health, and the framework's vocabulary makes this displacement invisible. And the iatrogenic anxiety, the am I optimized enough loop, is a framework-generated wound that deepens fusion while degrading the thing the framework claims to serve. The most Huberman protocol thing you could possibly do is run Huberman protocols through a meta-framework. Discover all of this, and then go for a walk without thinking about your cortisol.